Welcome to the Transition Bridge podcast, where we come in each and every week to hear another powerful transition story or to learn some great insight and knowledge about a topic on something that we may experience in times of transition. Well, today I have with me Brian I'm going to do this again because I want to say your name right.
No worries.
Sachetta.
Yep.
Sachetta.
And
Sachetta.
honestly, if you just give it like go confidently and don't worry about it.
My brain went like I've been saying Sachetta the whole time, so Sachetta. Okay,
Not a big deal.
here we go. Welcome to the Transition Bridge podcast, where we come each and every week to hear another powerful and inspiring transition story. And we also come to learn some great insight and knowledge about topics that we could experience in times of transition. Well, today I have with me Brian Sachetta, and we are going to tackle the topic of getting out of your head. You see, I think this is something we need to have a good conversation about because all of us in our day-to-day journeys deal with the battles within our mind. And if these thoughts are left unchallenged, these thoughts can wind up becoming the truth that we believe about ourselves, about others, and just sets ourselves up for difficulties in life, our social interactions, and just relationships. And so we want to learn how to manage and understand this more. Brian himself would share with you that back in 2018, he went through his own personal depressive episode that really shook him to the core, and it made even him question his own will to live. So what brought him out and through that time was the burning desire to figure out what makes depression tick, to help himself get better, and to share what he has learned with others. Well, now Brian is the owner and the author of Get Out of Your Head. It's a brand and a book series that seeks to help folks overcome anxiety and depression. Well, by trade, Brian is a software developer. He combines his experiences in the tech world with previous mental health battles, and he draws parallels between computer systems and the human mind. And he gives readers practical strategies for evading their own psychological demons. Brian currently has 2 books out in the market. Get Out of Your Head, a toolkit for living with and overcoming anxiety, and Get Out of Your Head, Volume 2, Navigating the Abyss of Depression. His mission is to help as many sufferers as possible, not only through his books, but also through his blogs and his podcast appearances. Brian, welcome. Welcome to the Transition Bridge podcast. I'm honored to have you today.
Hey, Debbie, thank you for having me, and I will see if I can live up to the expectations of the intro.
Well, I believe you will, and I know you have your own personal story. And what I love about you, Brian, and the different guests that come on is all of us have had some struggle in life, things that we have dealt with. And you have taken your own personal journey and now have created something for others that have, may potentially walk in the same shoes that you did. And your whole goal and mission in life is to help people do it better, help them suffer less, have some breakthroughs. And so I love that. And that's part of a transition, right? Getting to the other side. Because to me, when we go through these transitions in life, the struggles, the losses, when we get to the other side, there's always like a revelation of something for us to do. There's something for us to create. And so I just want to congratulate you on your 2 books. I think everyone should have these books on their end tables because I think it's, we could learn a lot from you today. So why don't you start with us from the beginning? You said you had your own personal episode with depression, and in that dark space, you found this determination to come through.
Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about that. You alluded to the fact that right in 2018, I went through a depressive episode of my own. I would say that working with my doctor, I was basically would classify that as dysthymia, which is basically low grade persistent depression. So it's sort of a depressive episode that lasts for like a couple of years. In my case, I want to say like a year and a half. And, obviously it's like with the different forms of depression, right? We're not trying to compare in a negative way. When I say persistent low grade depression, or if I said major depressive disorder, the root of all of those diseases, if you will, right, is these different feelings, which are basically helplessness and hopelessness. In your own mind, you wake up every day, you walk around your house, you walk around town, you go to work and whatnot, and you can't shake these feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, right? You don't think that anything can get better, and you don't think it's ever going to get better. And so for me, right, it was, I guess, I guess I would say maybe I was lucky in the sense that I felt as though over time I could attribute the depression to a few different factors in my life. Whereas sometimes, right, there's a thing called endogenous depression, which is basically you have a pretty good life and you just have, there's no real reason why you should be depressed if we look at your life, right? And yet you are experiencing all these symptoms, and that is just as real and just as valid and legitimate as let's say, depression that is brought on by a specific circumstance or stimulus. And so for me, right, it's centered around, and I do just want to preface or give a little disclaimer that because we're talking about depression and this specific episode, things will get a little deep, a little dark, right? And
Mhm.
so for me, it's centered around a few different things. So the first one being that around that time in 2018, I somehow stumbled into a bunch of climate research, right? And that research that was published by a bunch of different government organizations and scientists was showing that, the world was in a scary and precarious place of basically saying that we have only so much time to correct the way we are living and stop polluting and damaging the earth before we cause irreparable damage, right? And that was something that I had heard of before. I had read, maybe a blog post here or there. I had watched, let's say, I think it was Al Gore's movie Inconvenient Truth and whatnot, but it's sort of like the notion of when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, right? I was not in the right frame of mind. Well, maybe I might even say the wrong frame of mind to digest that information, take it in, and kind of have this, oh crap kind of moment, right? And so for me, finding all that information when I did, it was something of what I would say existential despair, right?
Mhm.
Understanding that, and I'm not here to debate whether or not the research is valid and whatnot. I think we could all say on a reasonable level that like the way that we are living and treating the earth is not good. I don't know if that means that's going to cause apocalypse 10 years from now, 10 decades from now, 10 million years from now. Who knows, right? But I think we can all say that the science is a little bit scary, and we are seeing changes in the world occurring already, right? And so the question that's all on our minds is, when is there going to be a tipping point of the behavior that we are exhibiting in the world leads to sort of a runaway train sort of experience, right? And if you run that course in your mind to its logical end or logical extreme, you can go to some pretty dark places thinking about, right, destruction, uh, let's say catastrophe, and sort of just terrible, terrible things happening in your community, in the world, in the country, and all that stuff. And so that was sort of my entry point into what I call the abyss, right? So the book that I wrote, I always kind of focus on this notion of depression being an abyss. And I said, the subtitle of that book is Navigating the Abyss of Depression. And so at that point, it was sort of like, wow, this thing smacked me across the face, and I don't know what to do about it. It really sunk
Mhm.
me into this dark, dark place for a long time. And then I would say on top of that, right, it was sort of a transition moment, if you will, where I had just gotten a new job. And in my head, I had always said to myself, oh, okay, I'm in this previous job. I don't like it so much. I want to go do this other thing. If I could just do that, and I could have more control over my schedule, I could make a little more money, a little more freedom, I will finally be happy. And fast forward 6 months after me saying that to myself, I'm in this new job and I am completely miserable, right? And it's not just the climate science stuff. It's the fact that like I didn't enjoy the job, and I have these expectations that were in my head that now I can't justify. I can't rationalize or make sense of the fact that I told myself things would be good when I got there, and now they're anything but that, right? And so that was another big one. And then somewhere around that same period, maybe a few months after the climate stuff came out, my grandmother ended up passing away, and she was older. She was 90 and lived an amazing life and had an amazing family. And I'm so grateful for the time that I was able to spend with her. But that too is a transition period, right? Where
Sure.
I will try my best not to get too choked up right now. But like my grandmother was very special to me, and that was a tough time to go through. And so it's like you've got all these things swirling, and then the next thing you know, you're thinking about, death and life and existence and the meaning of it all. And that's really where I got to across that depressive episode. And if I can kind of fast forward things and put a little cap on this to turn the conversation back over to you, it was, maybe 6 to 12 months later, I said to myself, look, I've been in this terrible place for a long time. What am I going to do about it? Like, I want to live. I want to be alive, even though my brain is telling me otherwise. And so I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was basically like white knuckle it. And I said, I've done this before in the sense of I've been through depressive episodes, but I've also been through a lot of anxiety in the past, right? And I looked at my body of work of the blog posts and, the first book that I published and whatnot. And I said, the only thing I know how to do right now is to say, let's treat this as a science experiment. Let's say, okay, Brian, read a bunch of books, talk to a bunch of different people, go to therapists, find out all the information out there on this subject, do your best to figure it out and move past this with the intention of one day turning around and taking that information and sharing it with other people in hopes of helping them through the same sort of difficulties.
That became like your North Star in a way, to just looking for the knowledge to help yourself and get more understanding. I appreciate that because that was a battle. It's easy to sit back, all of us, when we're having a bad day or a bad season, but to white knuckle it, like you said, and to press through. So is this where you came up with the whole analogy of the computer and the brain and the parallel work that you've discovered there, or how creatively you've come up with um, the computer and the brain? Because the brain is everything. It's so complex.
For sure. And I appreciate the compliments. The computer and the brain analogies stem from the fact that as my full-time job or my full-time role, I'm actually a software developer. And I do think there are some pretty good parallels between the human mind and a computer. Sometimes people will sort of jokingly say like, "Oh, your CPU as in your brain," right? I I try to be a little bit cautious with the analogy because we are humans, right? We are people. We are not computers. However, at the same time, there are some cool things that we can learn from the computing world that we can then take in to our own lives and apply, that can be helpful. So where that analogy came from was basically, I've been a software developer since I graduated college. That was, oh geez, I want to say 12 years ago now. I might even be wrong on that. Yeah, 12 years ago. And so how I like to phrase it is if you do anything for a long enough period of time, insights will arise. And so I really started the writing and the anxiety or the mental health stuff in earnest in 2016, 2017. And I had been doing the software development for about 5 years at that point. At some point after that, right, there was, or even I guess I would say, because the ideas are always bubbling up in your mind. They're sort of marinating, if you will. So there was a convergence at some point where, I'm writing software, I'm reading books about psychology, and I'm learning these different things. And then all of a sudden it's like, I'm writing a software program and I'm like, aha, I see what that book was telling me, that had seemingly had nothing to do with software or vice versa. This software is teaching me something that had nothing to do with anxiety, for example, right? And so one of the examples that I give on that front is the idea that in computing, there is a notion of a loop. And a loop is basically just a repetitive task that can run any number of times, right? So a lot of the times you will hear something called an infinite loop. So an infinite loop is something that software developers try to avoid because it'll crash their programs. It's basically when you run one of these loops in your software, and it has no condition to break out, and thus it basically bogs down the CPU, and the CPU is like, I'm now out of resources here because I know that I'm stuck in this loop forever. And so when it comes to anxiety, right, we run loops in our own minds. So whether it's we're worrying about a job interview that we're going on next week, or we're fretting about how we're going to pay our bills, right? We're running these loops and saying, oh, what happens if this happens? Oh, am I going to feel good? Am I going to feel bad? I don't know how this is going to play out. And so we start getting scared, right? And we run these preoccupations in our minds. The example that I give of the infinite loop and then what is called sort of like a breakout condition or a break condition. If you have a loop, right, you may say in your software, hey, I do actually want to run this task. I want to perform this task, let's say 10,000 times or some large number of times. However, I still need to tell the computer that at some point in time, it needs to stop running the loop. It needs to break out. Otherwise, it's just going to run itself into a state where, again, the computer gets bogged down and then everything crashes, right? The
Mm,
equivalent there being that, like, we run the worry loops in our minds so much that we tire ourselves out and we have a panic attack or we get anxiety and we say, oh, goodness, I'm done with this. I got to go to bed, right? And so I guess the analogy there is basically giving ourselves break conditions or sort of a reason to get out of the loop. So we say, okay, I realize that I have been running these loops in my mind. That is sort of once I have that awareness, I can then say,
mhm,
okay, now I need to go do something else. I need to go do some deep breathing. That deep breathing allows us to break out of that loop, right? It's sort of so for example, if you were to say to the computer, on the 10,000th loop, stop running through the loop, right? We are telling ourselves that, hey, mind, you are running these loops. And when some certain set of criteria occurs, or we have the awareness to understand what is happening, we will allow ourselves or we will instruct ourselves to get out of that pattern that we are running in our mind. So that's one example. There's a lot of them that I talk about in my blogs and stuff like that. But I do think it can just be kind of fun to have a tangible, like a concrete parallelism, if you will, to some other subject, right? Because I think a lot of the times people, we hear these abstract notions of like when somebody's teaching something, right? And they're very off in the abstract, and you're like, I don't get this. This doesn't make a ton of sense. As soon as somebody can put something concrete to it and say, here's a specific example, here's a specific
mhm.
story, here's something that you can relate to, all of a sudden it sinks in a little bit better. So I do understand that, the topics that I talk about sometimes are technical and maybe not necessarily for everybody, but that's just like what I know how to do because I spend 40 plus hours a week writing software and then, maybe another 20 writing mental health stuff. So that's kind of the gist there.
What I love about that is that to me it's a visual. When I think of a computer, like one of my older brothers was a computer programmer, like way back, when they used that, like way back, like in the 90s or something. And so, when you think about your mind, what are we programming it with? That creates that loop that never stops. And like a computer, like what are we building in the computer? What are we building in our brain? Like I like the visual, the analogy, um, to give better understanding and how we can untie that loop. What you're talking about is like being aware of the patterns that are going through our mind and to recognize that it is a pattern and it's something that can be stopped. Um, so I do a lot of work with people, maybe like with the emotional pain and those same thoughts, that affect their soul, affect their heart. Well, what is the one thing that you keep thinking? What is that lie that you're believing about yourself? As a result of these loops that go round and round. And so it's so important. Like, okay, so on a spiritual base, when I was, getting ready for the episode, I remembered this scripture. And to me, it just says it all. It says, whatsoever is true, whatsoever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think on these things. And that's basically what you're trying to, like you have something in your blog about giving your mind something good to worry about. What's the exchange? If we're in that place where we're believing lies, well, what's the truth? And what is something that just seems horrible? What's lovely and good? Like to give that exchange in our brain and our emotions, and hopefully will help manage some of that anxiety and depression, bring it down.
For sure. Yeah. And the word that they use a lot is rumination, right? When
Yes.
we are dealing with anxiety, when we are dealing with depression, we ruminate a lot. And that is the same idea of looping, right? That we talked about a minute ago. It
Hmm.
is cycling over the same thoughts and ideas again and again and again. Worries, preoccupations, fears, doubts, anxieties, right? Just going over
Right.
them again and again. And I the difficult part about talking about this is being able to state what I just stated, but then also have respect for the fact that this is really difficult, right?
Yes, it's not
It's
easy.
it's simple, but it's not easy. So we say to somebody, one of the difficulties, right, is, and I know I just said that, but it's like we may say to somebody, like, done the wrong way, we would say to somebody, hey, you're thinking that thought, just stop thinking about it, right?
Right.
That is the solution, but it's the actual implementation of that is much harder, right? Because if you
Mhm.
think about our brains, right, it's like they are survival machines. If you
Right.
think about being, in the forest, in the woods thousands of years ago, facing hungry and ferocious predators, they were looking around at all times, being like, how do I get out of this situation? How do I keep myself safe? And so we now find ourselves with that same brain in a moderately, if not really safe world, right? I would say hopefully, or if we
Mhm.
like, thankfully, a lot of us who are listening, find ourselves living in safe communities and whatnot. And it's like, that is awesome. However, we are still dealing with these brains that are worrying and plotting and planning and trying to keep us safe all the time. And so the risk of that is that sometimes if that, taken if that happens too often or we can't get that to turn down, basically it's like we can see things that maybe aren't there, right? We can see an unsafe person in somebody who just comes along and says hello to us, right? And so going back to the thought I had a minute ago of basically telling somebody, hey, you just got to stop thinking that one thought, it is that is the answer. That is the solution. But it's much deeper and more difficult than that because we're dealing with these brains that are really tricky. And if you look at sort of the brand that I put forth and some of the darkness in it and the fact that it's got this snake logo, right? And the snake brain logo and whatnot, that is what I'm getting at is the fact that this stuff is all so hard. Yet at the
Mhm.
same time, like it's work that we need to do. And once we train our minds, right? Once we sort of tame our minds, going off of that snake analogy, we can then eventually implement these simple solutions, or the ones that sound simple but are not easy to implement because there's a lot more happening under the hood than meets the eye.
Absolutely. This is a deep work. It's a daily work. It's a continual work because it is like a reprogramming. And it does take time. It's not an easy fix. So based on that thought, do you have like a daily routine of what you do on a daily basis to maintain your thought process?
Yeah, I try to be as honest as possible, and that honesty right now is saying that my daily routine has changed as of late. I have been going through some health issues, which I think I have a hold on, but it's been a little bit challenging, and that has basically forced me to, try to make sure that I am keeping my stress levels low, and making sure that to your point, right, of how do I how do I keep a hold on my mind and how do I make sure that the thoughts going through my mind are ones that are decent, right? Um, my routine, I guess, and it's speaking on the subject of transition periods, right, and just transitions in general. For me, right, is like basically I kind of have a right at the moment I kind of have a nervous system disorder, which is it's a short term thing that my body will be able to heal itself. I hope, and my symptoms have been getting better. But for me, I'm in this transition period right now where it's like uh, given a certain situation, right? If I get stressed out, which can happen easily, given the fact that I have this disorder right now. All sorts of bad symptoms can pop up. I can get nerve pain. I can start sweating. I can get panic attacks, anxiety. I can get dizzy. I can get heart palpitations and whatnot, and so it's frustrating. But I will say, and again, this is just the honesty piece of trying um, to tell it how it is and help listeners make inferences that are helpful. For me, right, it's like I know that the right now the issue that I really have to deal with is keeping those stress levels low because when they get high, then I get all those symptoms, right? And so this disorder or this condition that I'm dealing with right now has really forced me to go back to the basics and say, like, okay, how am I structuring my life? When I get out of bed, what is the first thing that I'm doing? Is that causing me stress? When I go to work and I get in certain situations, are those things causing me stress? And so it's a difficult practice, right? Because you have to almost analyze and rebuild every part of your life. And I don't mean that in like, it's not like I'm, it's like, okay, get a brand new job, get a bunch of new friends and all that, but maybe your routine needs to change, right? And so for me, it certainly has. So to answer the question once and for all, what I have been doing as of late, right, is I have been waking up, immediately starting a meditation session. So I do 10 minutes and then I will go for a walk after that. At some point, if I'm working from home, maybe I'll shower midday after I work out. But if I'm going to the office, I will shower right away. I do a cold shower, or at the very least, I start with a warm shower and then I finish with at least a minute of cold. And then throughout the day, I will do another meditation session and I will drink a decent amount, maybe 2 cups of chamomile tea, which is, herbal and soothing and all that. So for me, right, it's like that routine is focused around keeping the stress levels low. I think it has some parallels to anxiety and the thoughts and all that, where it's basically like we have all had that experience, right? When we are stressed out and when our stress levels are high, the thoughts
Mhm.
come in much faster and are much more dangerous. When you are
Yes.
calm and you are mellow, you're like, okay, thoughts coming in, but no big deal. Like my body is kind of not in a fertile place, right? To take that seed in and let it grow. So for me, that's the routine right now. And I honestly think that, hopefully once I get past this, I will keep that routine going because I know that I look back and I say to myself, like, I have kind of pushed the system, as in my body, a little bit too hard over the last 5, 10 years. And it would be nice to experience less stress overall, even if, my body gets to a spot where it's like, it doesn't get to that high stress state way too easily. So yeah,
Exactly.
that's definitely an important thing. And the meditation, I would say, is sort of the most important piece there because if you do a guided one or if you just sit down, it forces you to be with your thoughts and to develop the awareness of the patterns in your mind and say, okay, I'm doing that thing again. Like calmly, I just need to go back to my breath and I need to focus on that breath and just say, let's drop the thought, right? Because it's a never ending practice and it's our thoughts are always with us. So it's something that's very valuable and has a lot of application across our entire lives.
I agree. Like a holistic approach, mindfulness, meditation, calming our brains, calming our souls, even nutrition. I'm sure there's so many foods that trigger anxiety or just inflammation in our body. Just I think every person is so individual in this topic. What triggers one person doesn't trigger the other. So everybody has to find that their own uniqueness and what works best for them. But the mindfulness, the meditation, taking a 90-minute walk, they say just getting outside, being in the sun, all of these environmental changes are like really healthy for us. And I agree with you. When we are physically tired, we're vulnerable to the thoughts that come in. They seem to be more magnified than the day before. But if you're extremely tired, in fact, one of my teachings on transitions is we all have inner challenges. We all have doubts and insecurities and fears. And we have a measure of them that we're aware of. But when transition comes into life, especially if it's a difficult one, a loss, or you really have to make a major change in your life, all of those inner challenges get magnified in times of transition. And it's really so important to be aware of them. Don't deny them. Like denial is like our enemy. It just kind of keeps us on hold because we never look at the situation. And so, like what I hear you saying is, okay, I'm aware now of these thoughts. And this may seem like really funny, but like the topic of rejection, working with someone who has rejection, a lot of that is things that we think we're being rejected when we really are not. And just again, those thoughts that we set ourselves up to be rejected. And so, for myself or for other people, we anticipate walking into the room, we're going to be rejected. We look at this person and just something on their face says, they're rejecting me. And we are causing anxiety, causing depression, most of the times those thoughts are not true. But because we've learned that behavior and we believe that about ourselves, that keeps that anxiety and depression going in that area of our life. And so much of that is recognizing the pattern of how I'm thinking. Okay, when I walk in that room, if I look at that person, I can't believe they're rejecting me now. I have to retrain the way I interact socially. I have to retrain the way that I'm in a situation. Otherwise, people will stop going out. And then they'll start isolating. So it's like this ripple effect, this multi-layered thing of really not denying the emotions, not denying the mental thoughts that we're having, but becoming aware and say, okay, this is it. And maybe if there's a way to understand why we're thinking the way we are, but then also have the tools, that you're giving people, like in your book and coaching. I know people come to you for coaching. And I think the best coaches are the ones who have walked through the issue because they know and understand how to coach. So when someone comes to you for coaching, Brian, what can they expect from you? Like, what is your process?
For sure. I like to say that, or I like to emphasize the fact that I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist, right? So I
Right.
can't diagnose, I can't treat like with medication or anything like that. What I can do is I can be a supportive, tough, loving friend. And I say tough, loving in the sense that these issues are difficult, right? And I am, as you can tell probably by my website, by my books and whatnot, the covers, I'm not one to shy away from certain things. And so if somebody comes to me, like I will give them the love that they need, right? But I'm not going to say like, hey, you're dealing with anxiety, so like stay in your house all day and, don't put yourself into those situations that are making you anxious, because that, like you said, right, the isolation then leads to something of a downward spiral. And the next thing you know, you don't feel so good. And then because you don't feel so good, you withdraw further from society and so on and so forth. So the coaching is basically, again, me being a tough, loving, but supportive friend in this difficult battle, for our mental health. And then also taking the ideas that I talk about in my books and helping the person that I'm working with, the client, apply those ideas to their own life. So it's not therapy, but it is sort of guided application of the works themselves, if that makes sense.
Oh no, it totally does. So if someone were to come to you, what would be two or three things of like some tools? Can you share some tools of what you give to people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing, right, is that kind of in the same vein that when I go on a podcast, right, I want to talk about things that are going to resonate with the host audience. When somebody comes to me for coaching advice, I want to know a little bit about their situation, right? So the first call is more of a probing and getting to know one another, and it's trying to say, what exactly is it that you're dealing with? What's going on in your home life, your social life, your work life, all that. What's going on upstairs, right? In your mind and in your brain. Like, are you dealing with anxiety? Are you dealing with depression? Do you not know that maybe you're dealing with some of those things? And again, I can't diagnose someone and say, hey, this is depression. But if somebody comes to me and says, I am dealing with depression, here's the specifics of my situation, what can you help me with? Then we start diving into, specific chapters of the books or specific tactics and strategies that I outlined there. I'd be happy to give some examples, but I think maybe what might be more helpful as a cue would be if you were to say, hey, let's pretend this is anxiety and the person is in this situation, or it's depression and they're dealing with something else. It just give me a little bit of a cue to go off of, and maybe I can dive in.
Okay, well, this person is feeling really depressed because they're struggling, they can't get a job. They keep trying, they know they're highly educated, but everything about them is just not working, and they've lost hope, and they just feel like they've stepped out of the race, and there really isn't anything for them to do in life.
I'm very glad that you were able to come up with something quick. And that's a great example. I think a couple things, right? Is first kind of re-acknowledging the fact that hope that they have lost is indicative of the condition that they are in and not some other abnormality, or let's say there is nothing wrong with them outside of the depression itself, right? Because if we go back to asking the question of what is depression, right? I would say, again, it's a pervasive state of hopelessness and helplessness. And so my general philosophy and what I would sort of coach to this person is saying, look, I know everything looks dark and hopeless right now, but that's how depression works. And thus, if we can treat, well, maybe not treat, because again, I'm not licensed, but if we can attack the hopelessness, then everything else will fall in line. And so then we would start going through, again, some of the specific ideas in the book. Where I start usually, which is where the book starts as well, is the notion of sort of some different frameworks for looking at different diseases, right? So the one that I talk about in the book is a holistic model. It's called the biopsychosocial model. That model basically, like all these models, would seek to say, hey, where do diseases come from, and then what are some possible what are some possible ways that we could approach that disease or treat that disease? And so biopsychosocial is a portmanteau of three different words. So it's biological, psychological, and social, basically saying that, okay, if we look at depression through this same biopsychosocial lens, there are factors in the biological realm, the psychological realm, and the social realm. And so even though the person who is coming to me is saying, I have lost hope that I can't find a job, that is what is keeping me down right now. My guess, I'm not 100% sure, but my guess would be that there are other factors playing in there as well. And so I would do a little bit of digging to say, what's going on, biologically, right? How are you eating? How are you sleeping? How do you treat your body? Do you exercise and all that? Psychologically speaking, what beliefs do you hold? Are you thinking dark, negative thoughts all the time? My guess would be yes, if we're dealing with depression, right? So I'd say that's sort of the foundation that I would lay, and kind of on a first call, maybe even on a second call, try to figure out what some of those details are. Get that person to open up a little bit, and then we can be more pinpointed in some of the specific strategies that we look at. I would say, right, just to be able to give something tangible before we hop off the call is, when it comes to depression, right? Unfortunately, it can be an all-encompassing disease. I think with anxiety, there's a little bit more of start and stop, right? Where it's like you get into a fearful situation, you leave that situation, and maybe the anxiety goes away. Whereas with depression, by definition, right? Depression, if you look in the DSM, it will basically say that it's this state of helplessness and hopelessness that lasts for a minimum of 2 weeks, right? So just by nature of it, or by definition of it, depression kind of doesn't leave us. And that's what's so difficult about it. And so it can be challenging to approach, because we have to find a way to basically get the dark clouds that have been hovering over us for a long time to move. However, there are still things that we can do to boost our mood, right? Whereas depression is still a mood disorder at its core. So just some tangible, tactical things to leave with people. A couple, I guess, right? So I talked about the cold showers earlier.
Yeah.
The cold showers, there's a little bit of research, there's not a ton, but there's some research that basically says when you get into cold water, your skin picks up that cold water. There's, cold receptors on your skin, sends an antidepressive-like effect up to your brain. And that, if you're getting an antidepressive-like feeling going up to your brain, then hopefully you're going to feel a little bit better. Obviously, doing cold showers is difficult. It's not for the faint of heart. But if somebody's listening, they're looking for, a tactical thing that they can do right now or tomorrow or integrate into their daily routine, that's something that I would recommend. Another one would be just thinking about the benefits of exercise, right? So there's studies that say that exercise can be just as effective, if not more effective, in the treatment of depression than psychotropic drugs. And I always say that with the caveat that that is not me giving any opinion on whether somebody should be on or not be on psychotropic drugs, right? That is a decision that is made between the person and their doctor. The way that I like to frame it is basically saying, in this difficult fight, we want as many tools on our side, right? And so exercise, all I'm trying to say is that exercise can be one of those tools. So find things, in the exercise realm that excite you. If you like playing basketball, playing basketball, go play basketball. If you like, going out with your friends, playing pickleball, play pickleball. If you like a solitary, gym session, hitting the weights, hitting the treadmill, do that. But find something that'll get your heart rate up a little bit, that'll get you feeling a little bit better, and also like putting a little bit of more pep in your step or a little bit confidence back into your mind, right? And I think that when we do that on a regular basis, the research is pretty solid there in showing that that can have an antidepressive like effect on our mood as well. So those are a couple things that I think are tangible. Again, they're not rocket science, but this is a battle, right? Depression is a battle, and so the thing that I said earlier of having as many tools on our side, I mean that like so literally, where you got to basically look around and say, okay, if this is if my mood has not really changed, and it's going to be stubborn, then I need to do all that I can to help force that change. And so we add all these things into what I would call our mental health toolkits. And the goal is that over time, right, we change our mood little by little. And then eventually we stack up enough small wins to get the flywheel going. And then one day we look back and we say, wow, I had a good day. I had a good week. I had a good month, so on and so forth.
I love that. First of all, just having someone to talk to is therapeutic. It helps. Just hearing ourselves verbalize our struggle is half the battle to me right there. Because when we don't talk about it, it just stays inside. But then even the tools that you gave, I know you said it sounds simple, but they're so powerful. Because you're right, because exercise, the endorphins, and just for me, when I do exercise, I feel like I beat the day. I felt like I took control of my day. My day didn't control me because I made myself go do something that I don't like to do, but I know I need to. And yeah, and all of those things. So your coaching sounds really great because lots of times it's the conversation and then layer by layer, figuring it all out. I have this quote here thought of when you were speaking. Depression is when you don't care about anything, and anxiety is thinking too much about everything. And the two together is just like horrific. So, yeah, they're two different feelings, they're two different emotions. And so, I'm going to give you the final say here. If there's just anybody that I know will be listening right now that feels like they're struggling with either anxiety or depression, or maybe both, and they're just kind of hanging on and they need some hope. There's a quote here that says, there is hope, even if your brain tells you there isn't. And that's from John Green. There is hope. So, can you just speak some hope into somebody's life right now?
Yeah, most definitely. I definitely get emotional when I talk about this stuff because it's hard. It really is hard. But I write from the standpoint of kind of no ego, right? Of saying, here are my experiences. I've been through some of the same difficult things that you have. And I'm not trying to dress that up or, make myself feel good or anything like that. I write from that standpoint purely off of that hope, right? Of hoping to show folks that somebody has done it before. And I'm not trying to sound special or anything like that. I'm trying to give specific evidence or a specific example. I hate talking about myself, but I would say like a guiding light sort of thing, right? And I think the message is sort of simple, right? In the sense that like sometimes all it takes is one little spark of hope, of one little piece of evidence showing us that something is possible. My hope is that I can be that in some small way to your audience, to my audience, to my listeners, to my readers. I really try to speak from the heart and say, again, this stuff is so difficult. However, if you look at the research, if you read, there's plenty of other authors out there as well, and podcast hosts and subject matter experts. These diseases, if we want to call them that, anxiety, depression, they are beatable. There are ways past them. There are coping mechanisms. There is so much information and research out there. Obviously, I hope to distill some of that information down to folks and make it more approachable such that they don't have to, go researching on Google for 2 years or whatever. But that information is out there. And, just to be real for a minute, I would say to those who have lost hope, right? My heart really does go out to you. It's a hard world. Life is really, really difficult. There is no way around that. However, at the same time, there are awesome things in this world to be excited about. And one of the things about depression is it robs you of that excitement. It makes you feel as though you will never get it again and that it's not even possible, right? You may rationalize it to yourself and say, oh, I used to be excited about things, but I was just a kid. I was naive. I now know how the world works. It's a dark, evil place, and I'll never be excited about anything again. Once again, that is depression talking, right? Don't let the depression win. Fight that battle every day. It's a winnable battle. And as soon as you come out of that mindset, right, you will look up and you will say, and maybe up is the wrong word, but you will look at those same things that you were looking at previously and you will see them differently. You'll look at the things that once brought you excitement, then didn't bring you excitement anymore. And then you look at them again and you say, wow, that brings me excitement again. That means it wasn't necessarily the thing. It was me and what was going on inside my mind. And so, again, my heart goes out to those who have lost hope, but I implore everybody to remember that hope is still there. It remains. And there's a lot of things to be hopeful about, even though this, the battle of our mental health and for anxiety and depression is really dark and tough at times. I would say if you need a supporting friend, somebody that will listen to you, or you want to just reach out, I'm sure Debbie would love it, and I know I would love it as well. My goal is to be there for folks, right? And I know how difficult these things can be. So, again, heart goes out to you, and my hope is that things will get better soon because I know that they can, even if it doesn't look like they will right now.
Thank you for sharing that, Brian. And to me, I heard the word veil. It's almost like, the things that it brought us joy and excitement before that. Depression and anxiety is like a veil that just, like you said, robs us of our joy, and it's blinding us to the goodness that's around us. And so I'm just so grateful for you. And I just can't highly recommend Brian enough for everyone who's listening. His website, getoutofyourhead.com. Just go read his blogs, connect with him, because this is a person who knows and understands. And as I love how he shared, he could be your friend as well as your coach and understand what it is that you're going through. There is hope, even if your brain is telling you there isn't, because hope never goes away. It's there. It's just being veiled right now. So connect with Brian, connect with him, restore your hope. Get it back, because you have so much to do in this world, and don't let this rob you of what it is that you're created to do, because we're waiting for you. Your light still needs to shine, and we need you. So connect with Brian and let him help you take that veil off. I want to thank all of you each and every week for coming in. You're my transition tribe, and I know you come to hear these stories and to learn. And the bottom line is, all of us together each week, as we hear these stories, we are growing, we are embracing new truth, and we are being transformed by the purpose and the power of our transitions.